recommendations of the Truth Commission, the recommendations to make sure that there are institutional reforms, administrative reforms, prosecutions, etc., payment of reparations that would ensure that what happened in the past doesn't happen again. Now, that is where the second part of my topic comes in, subverting non-implementation, because the history of Truth Commissions essentially shows that most recommendations are not implemented by governments. And so we'll see how we are managing to deal with that. So a Truth Commission, on the other hand, is sometimes used interchangeably with transitional justice, but they are not synonymous. The Truth Commission is a transitional justice mechanism, one of many, like the ones that I mentioned right now, Human Rights Commission, etc. And they have a defined mandate. They have a set time frame. They have a defined mandate to do 1, 2, 3, normally to investigate past human rights violations with a view to achieving justice for victims, paying reparations, promoting reconciliation, and making recommendations for institutional reform. Now, a Truth Commission is a very interesting mechanism. It's a genus-based mechanism. In other words, it faces the past and it faces the future. And that is how it's supposed to work. You have to look at the past in order to investigate and find out what went wrong. Catalog the human rights violations. Catalog the human rights violations, but also with a view to building a better society. So a Truth Commission is actually very transformative, or it should be a transformative mechanism. It should transform society to some extent. But not only transform society, in our case, we wanted to transform mentalities. And that is where, the guarantees of non-implementation comes in. So a Truth Commission embodies both the nation and the state. It's not there for the government. It's normally set up by the government, but it's there, it embodies the nation and the state. And that is why it's extremely important that every Truth Commission is independent, and is impartial, it's not affiliated with a political entity, and it is free from political interference. And that is extremely important. If it is not independent and impartial, then the whole process loses integrity and credibility. So it's always characterized also by a tension between justice and reconciliation. We used to hear people say, we don't want reconciliation, we want justice. But the irony is that if you don't have a Truth Commission process, if you don't know the evidence, if you don't know the truth, then you cannot move within the context of the Truth Commission to getting justice. And that is just justice defined as prosecutorial, taking people to court and so on. But there are other forms of justice, restorative justice, for example, in the form of reparations that actually happened during the Truth Commission process, because we had an interim reparations program where we help people, with medical attention, we help people get social support, we help with livelihood support, and so on and so forth. But above all, I think, and this is not a very conventional definition or aspect considered as part of the Truth Commission, is that the Truth Commission is a very difficult national conversation that had to be had. The human rights abuses that are being investigated affected everyone, one way or another. It affected the country, not just the victims, and not just the perpetrators. It is a very, very difficult national conversation to have. People will come for work, victims, and say, name and shame their commenters, who might be sitting in the room, who might be watching TV, whose children are there, whose relatives are there. Some of these people killed, my parent killed somebody else's parent. Those things have to come out. And so it's a very, very difficult national conversation. It is a national conversation that is necessary to have, if the country should move forward. So these three here are very key elements of the Truth Commission process: the context, the mandate, and the operational strategy of the commission. So that context would determine the mandate of the commission. This is what we are going to. This is why we are doing. This is the background to the formation of this Truth Commission. And then that context, as we will see, will determine the type of mandate that the Truth Commission has, and the type of mandate that the Truth Commission has then will determine the operational strategy that is adopted to execute that mandate. And so in the Gambian context, we had the PPP government of Jallow from 1965 to 1994. This was a largely democratic government. There were elections every 5 years. There wasn't the thumb down on critics. The gentleman himself, Jallow himself, was a very refined gentleman. He was a democratic personality, but he stayed on for too long. So his government essentially became an oligarchy, a group of people who could be identified with the government, who ran for election and won election, and were appointed ministers over and over and over again. So that by 1994, people had gotten tired of him. And the military sensed this fatigue with the Jallow regime, and they moved in and toppled him on July 22nd, 1994, and then formed the Alliance for, the AFDRC, the Alliance for Patriotic Orientation and Construction, which then later, 2 years later, was changed to the Alliance for Patriotic Construction and Conciliation under APRC. The APRC government was led by Yahya Jammeh from July 1994 to December 2016. Now, this was a very brutal military government. When they came in on July 22nd, 1994, they promised to step down after 2 years. We are not here to stay, said Jammeh. We are here to correct the system and to go back to barracks. We'll conduct elections and we hand over. We will not allow any government to stay in power more than 10 years. They came on July 22nd, 1994, promised to stay for 2 years. We are there 22 years later. And during this 22 years, it was a very brutal period. Jammeh himself created what we came to call a shadow state within the country. A shadow state, that is, a set of parallel institutions that were committed to Jammeh and not to the laws of the land. So, for example, the junglers, his death squad, the junglers were a group of soldiers who were taken from the military command, the state guards, and placed directly under the office of the president. So they did not take any orders from the commander of the military. They took orders from the president himself. The other institution that he created was the National Intelligence Agency, the secret police. And so that too was directly under the office of the president and not under the Inspector General of Police or the government or the Ministry of Interior. So that shadow state took precedence over the formal state institutions, and those are the instruments that he used to kill, to torture, to disappear our opponents for 22 years. So that is part of the Gambian context. The other one is that the campaign promises of 2016, when the current president, Adam Barrow, was selected as the coalition candidate in the December 2016 election, he promised as he went around the country that if he won the election, he was going to set up a truth-seeking process to investigate the violations of human rights by Jammeh. And that's exactly what he did. So one context that is often left out of Truth Commission studies is that the lessons learned from the local consultations as well as other TBA processes that have happened. That too provides a context, because if you don't learn the lessons of past failures and successes from other commissions, you might not be able to create the type of commission that you want. So then the context that we had led to the development of the TRRC mandate, which was to create an impartial historical record of violations and abuses of human rights from July 22nd, 1994 to January 2017, in order to promote healing and reconciliation, respond to the needs of victims, address impunity, and prevent a repetition of violations by making recommendations for institutional reform and legal reforms, and then to establish and make known the fate and whereabouts of disappeared victims, to provide victims an opportunity to relate their own accounts of the violations and abuses suffered, and to grant reparations to victims in appropriate cases. Now, the last point of granting reparations to victims is very important, because until the TRRC, I don't think there was any Truth Commission process that had interim reparations. We are fortunate to be able to have interim reparations and to get some money from the government so that we'll help victims even as the process is going on. So we, granted reparations in the form of health support, in the form of psychosocial support, in the form of livelihood support, in the form of giving scholarships to the children of victims, and so on and so forth. So this essentially was the TRRC mandate. And then based on the TRRC mandate, we developed the operational strategy based on the principles of inclusivity and transparency. One of the lessons that we learned by looking at other truth commission processes was that in most truth commissions, the commissioners did all the work. They were overwhelmed by the amount of work they needed to do, from statement taking, victim registration, to research, to investigations, to outreach activities. So we set the TRRC up in such a way that the executing the mandate of the commission became a shared responsibility between the commission and the secretariat. Essentially, the commissioners were just allowed to listen to do the public hearings. They would sit and listen to witnesses, assisted by the legal team and by the research and investigations unit, composed of statement takers, researchers, and investigators. So that way, they would not be overwhelmed. So their work was essentially confined to that, gathering evidence, making recommendations and findings and so on. We also saw, like I said earlier, that a truth commission process is a national conversation, and therefore everyone needed to be involved in the conversation one way or the other. So at the national level, we allowed live coverage of all the public hearings and site visits on TV, on radio, and social media. We actually contracted with QTV that had a global outreach, global reach, a global audience. And so they covered every public sitting, every public activity live. So everyone was able to sit in their homes, in their cars, anywhere they were. If they had a social media outlet or a smartphone, they could watch or hear the hearings. And that's because we wanted to make sure that everyone was included, everyone knew exactly what was going to happen, that the information that came out of the process was democratized. They couldn't hide, they couldn't say that we didn't know that this was happening. And the public hearings were open to the public. If you brought an ID card, you could go in and sit in the hall and listen. Now, in order to fight the prospect of non-implementation, we launched the Never Again campaign. And the Never Again campaign consisted of outreach activities conducted by the secretariat units. We had several of these. We had the victim support unit, we had the women's affairs unit, we had the youth and children unit, and we had the reconciliation unit. So all of these units were constantly sent out to engage communities and talk to them about what happened in the Gambia, how it happened, why it happened, and how we could prevent a recurrence of a dictatorship and violation of human rights in the country. And the Never Again campaign was based, the reasoning for it was based on the fact that some of the factors that enabled the dictatorship were cultural factors. They could not be investigated by the commission. They were mentalities. They were the idea, for example, that the president is a Mansa. Mansa is the Mandinka word for king. In the local languages, there is no word for president. And so the president is normally referred to as the king. And that in itself is probably not harmful, but the baggage it comes with, the belief system, the beliefs that the president is a king, ordained by God, would lead to complacency, if you like, in terms of holding the president or the government accountable. And so the Never Again campaign tried to correct this anomaly between the political reality of the Gambian nation state as a nation state system and the perception of the government as a kingdom of all. So we tried to correct this anomaly through the Never Again campaign by visiting communities, as we'll see later. So the Never Again campaign carried out community outreach programs. Some of these folks are staff of the TRRC, Reconciliation Unit, the Youth and Children's Network Unit. So we went out into the country and engaged communities in dialogue, in conversation. What happened? Why it happened? How it happened? How can we prevent recurrence? Where does power lay in the country? Is the government all powerful? Is the president God ordained? So these were the types of questions that we raised and we discussed with communities across the country. And these were very, very frequent. Then the Women's Affairs Unit was meant to ensure that women and gender issues are mainstreamed in the TRRC process. It was created after a consultation with the Gender Platform for Transitional Justice before the commission started hearings. And so the Women's Affairs Unit, you can see some of the staff, kneeling in front. They would go across the country and talk to women and encourage female victims in particular to talk, because they had women's listening circles where only women attended. So women's listening circles enabled women to come forward and talk, and probably, come forward and give a statement to the commission, even if they don't, they were not willing to come forward to testify in public or in private. So this is part of it. The Youth and Children's Network Unit visited schools across the country. So, here you can see some of our staff, going out. We went to, they visited about 60 schools across the country, both high schools and elementary schools. And, they encourage young people to take, to know the law, to know the Constitution, but also to understand that power lies in the hands of the people and not in the government. So essentially, these outreach activities were meant to subvert non-implementation of recommendations, because we knew that recommendations of Truth Commission generally, especially when it comes to prosecutions or justice for victims, is not done. And but if you empower the young people, if you change the mentalities of the people, then you empower the people to be able to say no to dictatorship, no to human rights violations. And I'm happy to say that, as we'll see in a moment, that the Never Again campaign seemed to have worked very well, because now in Gambia, anytime there is an instance of a human rights violation or a tendency towards dictatorship, there's a public outcry from one quarter or the other. So the school outreach activities went. We also used poetry and music. Now, this poem here is a short poem, about 1 or 2 minutes, that one of our youth empowerment officers did, and it's a very interesting poem. If you could just.
The crowd until he told me wasn't anything with his making, he had nothing with his giving, so why were you sorry? It's the faith that he can. The injustices that are God. The bullets we put in dodge, the COVID we put in force, the lives of undaunted victims of allowed to run here, and here the pain we put in share. One man was the gun, the bullet, and the thing that the judge is doing an executioner, but it wasn't anything. If you have anything to do, anything you have to get. Why is it? They always say it. It is because the voices that they're supposed to hold in accountability, because the voices that stand in their sound, they think to speak against it long so far too long, so instead of loving you, you fear. Instead of following you, you obey. Like slaves, you bow down to the beg when you demand and lead and die by his commands like classless soldiers. We obey and never forget, reasons when we read and teach us to this place to lead, we fear it all. We empower our own oppressor. We read our own system, gather our own create, compose our own funeral songs, we can strengthen where we belong.
Volume, please. We cannot hear the person. Please add the volume up.
You are powerless because we feel. But today, things are going to be more. The things with the voices of the victims, we take on the sense that case and case to hear.
Can you try this again?
I think the problem is that you're not, you don't have your volume on.
You are powerless because we feel. But today, things are going to be more. The things with the voices of the victims, we take on the sense that case and case to hear the context of the victim. Turn the truth to reconcile and defend the knowledge before opportunity is from the past, the same we can target and send a new chapter of the party and justice where impunity is locked in the dungeons of distribution and injustice is unpossessed by the class of down. Together, we are strong. But understanding who we are and the power we will make us unbreakable with ignorance. In the time when we have taken Christ enough, never again will be worthwhile for Christ. They can't do anything, we will make them. They can't have anything, we will give them. So we will make just and punishment out of all people. They will be humble. Accountable. They will be transparent. Accountable to us. You will offer their DNA to accountable. They will learn to love and care for their countrymen. They will feel and understand the faith of the ordinary citizen, and then they will serve selflessly, and they will do so with integrity, piece by piece. We will keep together every section of this nation. So we will succeed. But we will not forget, we will never. The victims again, we will never. The silence again, we will never produce or abuse again. One man will never with so much power ever again. The nation, the people are the nation, and the other people. That like them all have the dictate the power to rule must out the gift. our life, we will have it in our future. And we will
Thank you so much. So this is the type of message that the Never Again campaign carried to the people, and we had these young people in the Youth and Children's Network unit that just went out there and spoke to people. So the final report was handed over to the government on November 24, 2021, and then December 23, they made the final report public. So, you know, contrary to what happens in other countries, they actually did not suppress the report; they published it. So everyone, you know, saw the report. But everything that happened at the commission before then was all in the public domain because it was covered live by the media and social media. And then May 2022, the government issues the white paper on the TRRC report, accepted all but 2 of the commission's 267 recommendations. The government promises to create a hybrid court to try Jame and others accused of crimes against humanity. Act 22 in Banjul has been renamed the Never Again Act. The government has committed to establishing a Victims Reparations Fund, a National Peace Commission, to repealing all the bad laws still in the books. And, you know, most of these commitments are actually in the works. They have not been, you know, instituted yet. They have not been implemented yet. Victims Reparations Fund, National Peace Commission. The bad laws are still in the books. So the bad laws that the dictator used to oppress the Gambian people, that people fought for 22 years, that the commission recommends to be repealed, are still in the Gambian books. And so that is something about the non-implementation of recommendations that we made so to develop a guarantee of. But then in the public schools curriculum, they have decided to include civic education as per the TRRC recommendations. And as we speak today, victims organizations, civil society organizations, and the general public are carrying on the TRRC's Never Again campaign. I was involved in creating a Never Again network that goes to schools and communities to talk to people. So these are just how some of the ways in which the Never Again campaign is living on, or the concept. The Act 22 was developed by the military on July 22nd, 1994. It has been renamed the Never Again Act. This is a statue, the Never Again statue in a village in Gambia. Here you have demonstrators, you know, commemorating the April 10, 11, 2000 student massacre. You know, they have as their banner, Never Again. And a veteran journalist, Data Hydra, was shot and killed by the Junglers Death Squad in December 2004. Every year, there is a Never Again march or event commemorating his life and making sure that his people, his family, and the Gambia get justice. These are very recent posters, just the last couple of weeks, where this guy, Amadi Jabate, who is a human rights activist, was being harassed by the police, and you have these flyers just coming out, Free Amadi Jabate, Never Again. And this also a poster, solidarity with Chairman Yankuba Dabo, is a member of the opposition United Democratic Party, elected to lead the municipality, and then apparently, you know, hunted or witch hunted by the government, and you have these t-shirts printed with Never Again on them. So essentially what I'm trying to say here is that the fight against non-implementation, you know, the subverting the possibility of non-implementation is working because the Never Again mentality, the Never Again concept is alive and well in the Gambian public, and people are very quick now to say never again. No, you can't do that, Mr. President, or you can't do that, Mr. Government.
So let's thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Baba Jallow, let me just say personally, first, this was a fascinating presentation.
Thank you, sir.
But second, I want to express my own admiration for your work.
Thank you.
I've seen different kinds of transitional justice and post-conflict justice efforts in other countries. In Gambia, you tried what seems to me to be one of the most ambitious in the scope of what you tried to do. So I think it's well worth studying, well worth all of us trying to learn from. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you,
We
sir.
look forward to seeing more, since you're very prolific, more writing on what you're doing.